If it's Thursday, President Biden closes out a critical overseas trip, declaring that Vladimir Putin has already lost the war in Ukraine as he tries to reassure NATO allies of America's support amid political volatility here at home. Plus, the cocaine whodunit deepens after the Secret Service briefs lawmakers, claiming that the agency just simply cannot identify any suspects in its investigation into who brought the illicit drug into the West Wing in a secure entrance. The investigation is now closed. And the FDA has approved the first ever over-the-counter birth control pill available without a prescription, marking a potentially enormous expansion for contraceptive care in America. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd reporting from Washington, where President Biden will be returning in just a few hours following a whirlwind week on the world stage. After closing out yesterday's NATO summit with a speech reaffirming NATO's relevancy and importance, today the president sought to reassure the world and our NATO allies about the stability of his own government here at home, the U.S.'s commitment to the alliance in general, and the fate of the war between Russia and Ukraine. At a news conference today in Helsinki, alongside the leader of NATO's newest member, Finland, President Biden responded to questions about political volatility in the United States ahead of the 2024 election. It's a topic of major importance and concern for U.S. allies, particularly in Western Europe, considering the last president, who is now the front runner for the Republican nomination, openly considered pulling out of NATO entirely. Here's President Biden today.
I absolutely guarantee it. There is no question. There's overwhelming support from the American people. There's overwhelming support from the members of the Congress, both House and Senate, and both parties, notwithstanding the fact there's some extreme elements of one party. We will stand together. Let me be clear. I didn't say we didn't guarantee it. We couldn't guarantee the future. You can't tell me whether you're going to be able to go home tonight. No one can be sure what they're going to do. I'm saying as sure as anything can possibly be said about American foreign policy, we will stay connected to NATO. Connected to NATO, beginning, middle, and end. We're a transatlantic partnership.
On the future of the war in Ukraine, President Biden also responded to concerns about Putin's potential ability to just simply outlast Ukraine on the battlefield.
Putin's already lost the war. Putin has a real problem. How does he move from here? What does he do? What agreement is ultimately reached depends upon Putin and what he decides to do. But there is no possibility of him winning the war in Ukraine. He's already lost that war.
Those comments come a day after President Biden, in a meeting with President Zelensky, assured him of the U.S.'s unwavering support and NATO's commitment to have Ukraine join the alliance after they win the war. And this also comes following a two-day summit where the U.S. and its NATO allies highlighted additional weapons packages that they are sending to the front lines, including long-range cruise missiles, air defense systems, armored vehicles, and, of course, those controversial cluster bombs that the U.S. reluctantly agreed to send over. Meanwhile, on the Russian side of the war, there's new reporting on the fate of some senior military officials following last month's failed mutiny, rebellion, attempted coup, however you want to describe it. And it's all raising new questions about the control of Russia's military and Putin's own grip on power right now inside the Kremlin. So we're going to unpack a lot of this. Joining me now, NBC White House correspondent Monica Alba. She's covering the president's trip in Helsinki. I got Mike McFaul here, former U.S. ambassador to Russia, our internal Kremlinologist here, and also an NBC News international affairs analyst. But Monica, let me start with you. Look, big picture. The United States is in Helsinki, you're in Helsinki, and Helsinki is now a capital of a country that is a NATO ally. This at one time would have been a red line for Vladimir Putin. So, I mean, just the setting today here is pretty unprecedented.
Absolutely, Chuck, and it really just sends a very strong message here from the United States and its NATO allies, the Nordic leaders that were gathered here in Helsinki, which does share an 830-mile border with Russia. And at one time, Finland was a pretty neutral party between Washington and Moscow, especially, of course, during the Cold War, where this would be considered very unthinkable for them to want to then join the NATO alliance. But, of course, it was that invasion of Ukraine that prompted their application for membership. And Finland was approved in record time. No country has been able to ascend into NATO in around a year or so the way that they have. And of course, soon behind them, we expect Sweden to join the alliance formally, given that Turkey finally got rid of their opposition to that pathway continuing, something that was a big question mark heading into this week overseas, something that the president really wanted to see happen and was delighted that it was able to actually be confirmed while he was in Vilnius, Lithuania, just over the last 48 hours or so. So today, this was a really clear, intentional message that President Biden wanted to send, that he was able to be here in Finland with the president, celebrating this and celebrating just the regional resonance when you look at that map of how important it is that now those two countries here can send the strongest message to Russia and to President Putin really directly, Chuck.
Monica, when you're on these foreign trips, you run into foreign press corps, you talk to other diplomats from other countries that are associated with other administrations. To hear that question about the U.S. political, how the U.S. domestic political issues could impact NATO, what would you say the level of concern is within the Western alliance? How often does it come up on these foreign trips when you're talking, when you're interacting with foreign media? How much front of mind is this?
It's a really frequent topic of conversation, Chuck, and you can look no further than just 5 years ago this week in that exact same room where a Finnish reporter presented this question to President Biden. That is where we saw former President Trump standing shoulder to shoulder with President Putin and siding with him over U.S. intelligence agencies about Putin's own denials over Russian intelligence in terms of the election interference. And what's significant there, of course, is the backdrop to all of this, which is that former President Trump could become future President Trump once again as the GOP frontrunner now. And yes, there's a lot of time left until the election, but everybody here from other press corps certainly is looking to this, looking back 5 years ago and thinking that doesn't mean that that couldn't be the future. So it is something that comes up a lot. And I think that's why you saw President Biden talking about the commitment to NATO from the U.S., regardless, he says, of who's president, will continue, but having to acknowledge that he can't predict the future. And certainly with someone else in office, a lot of this could change really quickly. Chuck.
Monica, you're in the actual land of the midnight sun right now. It's 11 o'clock there, and the sun is still out behind you. That is how far north you are. It's always
gorgeous.
Fun. It absolutely is an amazing backdrop. Terrific reporting. Get home safely, Monica. Thank you. Let me turn to Mike McFaul, of course, former ambassador to Russia and our resident criminologist here. And I want to get to the what the heck is going inside the Russian military. But let's step back here a minute. A lot of historians, first of all, I want to talk about the contrast of the setting. 5 years ago in Helsinki, it's Trump and Putin. Here we are 5 years later. Oh, by the way, Finland's a member of NATO. I mean, this is just a stunning development in so many ways, is it not, Mike?
Chuck, it is. Absolutely. By the way, I was in Helsinki in 2018 working with the NBC team. And not only did Trump side with Putin about our intelligence, he also said we should hand over a bunch of Americans to Putin to be interrogated. I was one of them. So I remember Helsinki very well. This is a very different event. But historically, I'm glad you brought it up, because I think we have to appreciate just how big a deal this is. Throughout the Cold War, we had a noun for it. It was called Finlandization. And it was what the Soviets achieved in their relationship with Finland to keep them out of NATO, to keep them neutral. Sweden, 2 centuries of neutrality. Think about that. 2 centuries of neutrality. And now Finland is in NATO. And in the run-up to the Vilnius summit, the Biden administration got the deal they needed with the Turks to bring Sweden in. This will be remembered as a very historic moment for the NATO alliance and as a big setback for Putin's foreign policy.
Are we about 10 years away? Is there going to be an Eastern European country that isn't going to be in NATO in 10 years if Ukraine wins this war, Mike?
I don't think there'll be a democratic country in Eastern Europe that won't be in NATO. I mean, look at that map that you keep showing. It's quite intense with all that green. Of course, it matters how the war ends and will Ukraine prevail in this war. I think they are. I agree with the president when he says Putin is losing the war. But you don't judge wars in the first or second year. You judge them by the last year. But I do think momentum is on the side of the democratic countries in Eastern Europe, and the autocratic countries are on the losing side.
Let's talk about what's happening inside the Russian military. I know you monitor, you've got your own sources, you monitor what's going on in Telegram. We have our own reports here. It's always very hard to confirm who's in and who's out. But generals are being sacked. It looks like, is Prigozhin being treated better than those that supported him?
Pretty murky picture, but the fact that it's murky and confusing, I think, is bad for Putin. So if you go back, and we talked about it, you go back to the Prigozhin mutiny, some said, I was one of those that said this is a bad look for Putin. Others said, no, this is a sign of strength. He's getting rid of all these guys that don't support him. But look at where we're at now. We have generals resigning, and General Popov, you're right, on Telegram. I did watch it. I listened to it several times, who just was kicked out. He's one of the main commanders in this war. And he said, we stopped, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he said, we stopped the Ukrainian armed forces in Ukraine, but then were stabbed in the back by our own generals back in Russia. That is not a message, if you're fighting a war, that you want one of your most popular commanders saying. And secondly, Prigozhin, we don't know what his status is right now, right? Putin called him a traitor, said there will be consequences, then said he'd be in exile in Belarus, and none of that appears to be true yet. So I think there's a lot of instability inside the armed forces that can't be good for Putin's ability to fight his war in Ukraine.
Were you surprised that Putin and Prigozhin met face to face?
Yes, I was surprised by that. Given that emotional speech that Putin gave, and he didn't have to give it, Chuck, right? He could have done this privately. He chose to go on national television. Think about it like an Oval Office address to the entire American people, where he called this guy a traitor, and then he's meeting with them. That is not a signal of strength. There's just no way you can spin that other than he just hopes that people are not paying attention. I suspect, however, that they are paying attention because Prigozhin does have a following within the Russian military. So maybe not all of Russia are, but the soldiers fighting in Ukraine, my guess is they're probably watching this.
What do you think happens to Shoigu and Gerasimov?
I don't know. I think...
I should say, for those not following along, the two leading military commanders right now for the Russian military, who Prigozhin was basically going to try to go to, in sense, who was Prigozhin's target. Sorry for, just want to bring folks up to speed.
Yeah. Defense Minister Shoigu and General Gerasimov, who's the head of the armed forces in Russia. Just a couple of days ago, Gerasimov was on TV, walking around, doing things. That was obviously a signal that he's still in power, that he hasn't been thrown under the bus. I don't think Putin can do that right now, pull either of those people out. That would look like complete capitulation to Prigozhin because of the critical things that he said that you just talked about. But down the road, 6 or 7 months from now, I would not be surprised if both of them were removed.
Mike McFaul, former ambassador to Russia for the United States. Appreciate you coming on, sharing your expertise.
Thanks,
good to talk with you. Let me go down to the Pentagon. I'm joined by Sabrina Singh. She's the Deputy Press Secretary for the Department of Defense. Sabrina Singh, thank you for joining me. Let me ask, I want to pick up on a quick Russia question here, specifically with whether our Secretary of Defense, Secretary Austin, what would you describe, when was the last time he's had a military-to-military contact with either Gerasimov or Shoigu?
Well, thanks, Chuck, for having me on. Again, as the Secretary has said before, we believe that contact with the Russian military, and as you said, mill-to-mill communication is extremely important so that we reduce risks and we operate in very similar areas of responsibility. And so it is important to have those mill-to-mill conversations. I'm not remembering the exact date when the Secretary had his last conversation, but it was certainly not recently. We welcome those conversations. We're open to having a dialogue with the Russian military, but there would be no negotiation in those conversations. Again, this is a fight that Ukraine is in against Russia that invaded their sovereign territory. military, and as the department, we are doing everything it takes and everything we can to support them in their military fight.
No, and I fully understand. The military communication is sometimes as much about making sure bad things, accidents don't happen and turn into bad things. And so what you just described, we're months along. Our two biggest adversaries, our military-to-military contacts have dried up almost completely in both China and Russia. Is that fair to say?
Well, just this week, actually, one of our leading policy heads here at the department did engage with the Chinese here at the Pentagon. And again, we are welcome and open to ongoing dialogues with Russia and the PRC. That is something we want, again, just like you said, to avoid any confusion, to avoid any conflict. And it really should be used as a way to deconflict so that tensions do not escalate. And so, again, we are open to having those conversations. Our lines are certainly open. And the Secretary welcomes that at his level and at all levels throughout the department.
I want to ask something about the issue of ammunition. We had to send over these cluster bombs, frankly, because everybody's running low on ammunition, including the United States. Can you just walk the viewers through the difficulty it is to ramp up munition production right now? What is the struggle here that put us in a position where we had no choice but to send over these cluster bombs?
Well, early on in the war, when Russia invaded Ukraine, we contacted our defense industrial base and engaged them because we knew this was going to be an artillery fight, and it continues to be just that. We're seeing the Ukrainians and the Russians expend artillery rounds at high rates, and so we knew that we would have to ramp up our production of 155 millimeter rounds. Now, it's not just us that is providing Ukraine with this type of ammunition. Excuse me. We also have our partners and allies all around the world providing that type of munitions to the Ukrainians, and so the cluster munitions that we did provide to Ukraine serve as a bridge so that our defense industrial base can continue to produce these 155 rounds. And again, we did not want Ukraine to be without artillery in this artillery fight. So it's something that, while you heard the president say it was a very tough decision for him to make, and he was consulted by the Secretary of Defense and his national security team, it was ultimately the right decision to make so that the department felt that Ukraine could remain in the fight with the artillery that they need against the Russians.
Does the United States plan to backfill the cluster munitions we sent over with more cluster bombs for our stockpile?
Well, we have thousands of rounds of cluster munitions, but again, our focus right now is getting the Ukrainians what they need on the battlefield to not only conduct their counteroffensive, but continue in the long term. So whether it's more cluster munitions or unitary 155 rounds, we're going to continue to supply Ukraine with what it needs on the battlefield.
No, but are we going to continue to produce and buy and stockpile cluster munitions?
Look, that's a decision that, again, I'm not going to get ahead of what we have right now in our stocks. Is we have thousands of rounds of these cluster munitions. We're always focused on refilling but also modernizing our stocks. And right now, the focus remains on getting Ukraine what it needs in its current fight.
I want to, Senator Tommy Tuberville, who's been holding up all these promotions into the Pentagon, including right now we have a Marine Corps without a commandant. He said today that he spoke with Secretary Austin on the phone. What can you tell us about that conversation? Any progress made?
Sure. So the Secretary initially had reached out earlier this morning, or I should say early afternoon, to engage with Senator Tuberville's office. We view these holds as a risk to our national security. These holds are incredibly damaging. It's been more than a century since we've had an acting commandant of the Marine Corps, and right now we have an acting commandant doing two jobs, both the commandant's job and the assistant commandant's job. That's a dual-hatted role that really requires two positions, and so the Secretary reached out to Senator Tuberville to see, to explain how detrimental these holds can be. It was a brief call, but the two agreed to continue communication into next week. So we hope that this ongoing engagement from the Secretary and the Senator not only continues, but does encourage Senator Tuberville to release his holds on our nominees.
Is the Secretary going to engage with any policy negotiations with Senator Tuberville, or is that something that the White House will do?
Well, we're not making concessions or changing our policy. Our policy is very clear. We're trying to ensure equity across the service and to all of our service members who live in states that they have the same rights as service members that live in other states. And just a reminder, our service members don't choose where they are stationed. They are given the assignment and they dutifully fulfill that assignment in the state that they are in. So we're not changing our policy. We've ensured equity that can exist across the services. Again, this is not a political fight. This is about our general and flag officers, our nominees, from 4-star generals down to 1-star generals, who deserve to be in the positions that they have been selected in because we believe they're right for the moment. And at this time, at a time when we're facing the acute threat of Russia in Europe and the rising challenge of China. We need our best team on the field, and those are our officers that are currently up for nomination and being held.
So the bottom line is, Secretary, the Pentagon's not going to be negotiating with Senator Tuberville. If anything like that happens, it's Congress or it's the White House?
Again, this is if the Senate, or if Senator Tuberville wants to change any type of policies, we leave that to the Senate to decide how best to go forward with that. Right now, our policy is in place. It is ensuring that our service members have the reproductive health access that they need, and we are encouraging the senator to drop his holds.
Sabrina Singh, the Deputy Press Secretary over at the Pentagon. Really appreciate you spending some time and sharing the perspective with us. Thank you. Coming up, culture wars in Congress. The passage of a key bill on national defense is in jeopardy as House Republicans push for some changes to the Pentagon policies on abortion we were just talking about, as well as gender-affirming care, diversity initiatives, and more. I'm going to talk to the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee next. Plus, DeSantis in damage control. NBC News obtains a confidential campaign memo that aims to reassure skeptical donors as DeSantis struggles to gain momentum. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Passage of the yearly bill that funds the U.S. military is potentially in jeopardy. The bill, known as the National Defense Authorization Act, passed the House Armed Services Committee by a vote of 58-1. But things have turned a bit contentious as Speaker McCarthy gave the green light for the fringes of the Republican caucus to add a series of controversial culture war amendments to the bill. Those amendments include restricting the Pentagon policy on abortion, gender-affirming care, diversity initiatives, as well as an amendment that would bar renaming military bases named for Confederate soldiers. There are also amendments to cut Ukraine funding, a ban on the transfer of cluster munitions. Speaker McCarthy defended the amendment process this morning.
I don't think that's a problem to let members of Congress who are elected by their constituents to have a voice and a say. It can go either way. What's interesting to me is you think it's a problem that now I have opened up Congress.
Now, if these amendments pass and are included in this bill, it sets up a likely impasse with the Senate, which is working on its own defense spending bill right now. So joining me is the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. It's Washington State Congressman Adam Smith. Congressman Smith, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Look, I am not one to get too dramatic about the defense bill because we've been at these moments before. You've been around this town a long time. The amendment process creates some, shiny metal objects, clickbait headlines, but ultimately this gets worked out. But let me ask you this. If some of these amendments pass, and politically they might, does that jeopardize your vote and your support for this?
Yes, and there's two important things to your question there. But number one and most important is to understand that the Republicans are bringing their culture war to the Pentagon, and it is harming our national security. It is harming our national security by passing policies that make it less likely that women, people of color, and the LGBTQ community will want to serve in the military, undermining our ability to recruit and support the best people available at a time when we have a recruitment crisis. These amendments that they're offering, if they pass, will present us with a bill that would significantly undermine the ability of the military to recruit and support their service members. So yes, I would wind up voting against that. As far as how it impacts the larger process, it puts Speaker McCarthy in a position where he will have to get 218 Republican votes in all likelihood to pass the bill. And, he might be able to do that, but it certainly risks the process, and it undermines the idea that we're trying to pass a bipartisan bill. That's what Chairman Rogers did out of committee, and I commend him for that. We worked on this to make sure that we worked on the stuff we agreed on, disagreed with. We got a bipartisan bill. This definitely is in jeopardy on the floor right now.
How much do you trust the Senate to sort of get rid of some of the extraneous amendments in here?
That's hard. You know, anytime you start a sentence off with how much do I trust the Senate?
You House guys are all the same. It doesn't matter the party. I could have a Dem or an R. It's like, no, no, no. The Democrats are the adversaries, or the Republicans are the adversaries. The Senate is my enemy, right?
Yes,
no, I hear you there.
I kid. I think I actually, in this case, I do trust the Senate to fix that. I guess the larger question of, okay, so if we fix that, if we move this stuff out and we bring the bill back, what does Chip Roy and the other far-right people on the Rules Committee do to block our ability to pass that bill? They've not been known for accepting defeat gracefully. So that's what I would, if you set the precedent, if you pass these things, if you put them in the bill, will Speaker McCarthy bring back a bipartisan bicameral bill and put it on the floor for a vote?
What will
happen on that front?
You've got a lot of Republicans you've served with a long time. There are 19 House Republicans that are in Biden districts. One would assume they don't want to go too far in one direction. Do you guys have a whip operation to work on these folks?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, this is not good for the Republican Party. Look, they're living in a bygone era. They want to pretend that we live in a world where bigotry and discrimination don't exist. That if you are a person of color or a woman or an LGBTQ person, you have nothing to worry about the armed forces discriminate against you. And that's the purpose of these diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, is to make it clear that history notwithstanding, we will give you a fair shake in the military now. But I remind people, just 13 years ago, we finally allowed gay people to serve openly in the military. And when we did that, every single Republican voted against doing that. And can we really say that our military would be better off if we had no gay people in it? So we need to work to be inclusive. And what the Republicans are doing today, they're trying to block that inclusion for women, for people of color, and for the LGBTQ community. And they're on the wrong side of the country, and they're certainly on the wrong side of what's in the best interests of national security.
I want to shift to another amendment, though, here that's actually more about, that has not to do with the culture wars, and it's the idea of clawing back the cluster munitions. Do you think we should restock our stockpile of cluster munitions that we just gave to Ukraine? I mean, if 100 countries think this should be banned, should we keep asking the defense industrial complex to keep making them?
No, we shouldn't, and that's not what we're doing. I don't know if there's a misunderstanding. We have, and the actual number is classified, so let's just say a lot of cluster munitions that were made as far back as the 70s. We are running out of excess ammunition to give to Ukraine. It's wrong to say that we're running out of it. We're preserving what we need for our national security, but the excess to provide Ukraine to continue that fight is getting low. And so the cluster munitions are the only realistic option. But please understand, the reason to oppose cluster munitions is because of the unexploded ordnance that they leave scattered across the battlefield. The Russians have mined the living hell out of Ukraine. They are going to be pulling that unexploded munitions out of it for a long time to come. These munitions are being used to help Ukraine gain back their own territory. So it's a different situation. But no, we should not be building more cluster munitions, and we're not.
Like I said, you spent a lot of time on these issues. President Biden was asked a question today, sort of, hey, can the West, can NATO count on essentially America and its current political polarization? The last president wasn't a big fan of NATO. He could become president again. There's certainly some House Republicans that aren't big fans of NATO, big fans of this war. What would you say to our Western allies? Is there a durable majority to support the war in Ukraine in the U.S. Congress?
Absolutely, there is a durable majority. And you saw the vote in the supplemental package we passed last year. There is a very small minority in the Republican Party who want to undermine that support. But the overwhelming majority of Republicans in the House and the Senate support our policy in Ukraine, and they support NATO. And by the way, the overwhelming majority of the American people do, too. It's pretty close to 2/3 in the most recent polling that support us supporting Ukraine. Now, they don't support going to war with Russia, and we should not do that. But we should support Ukraine's ability to defend their sovereign democratic country, and that's what we are doing.
Do you believe Ukraine has earned the right to be in NATO once this war is over?
Once this war is over, I think we should have that discussion. I think that is a discussion at this point that is more problematic than helpful in the current fight. Certainly, we're not going to bring Ukraine into NATO right now. Remember my point about we're not going to war with Russia. Bring them into NATO, Article 5, we're at war with Russia. So we're not going to do that. Once the war is over, the one thing we have to have is robust security guarantees for Ukraine.
That's right.
Does that require NATO membership? That's more debatable. But they need robust security guarantees to make sure Russia doesn't just do this again.
So if not NATO, they become Israel too, if you will, the way our security agreement with them. Fair?
We have a lot of security relationships with a lot of different countries that are short of an Article 5 commitment. So we have options to choose from. So yes, I think Israel is one potential model. There are others.
Congressman Adam Smith, Democrat from Washington State, the ranking member on House Armed Services, former chairman himself. Appreciate you coming on, sharing your perspective.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks for the chance.
Up next, some unsolved mysteries. The Secret Service just briefed House Oversight and Homeland Security lawmakers after closing its investigation into who brought a dime bag of cocaine into the White House. They say there are no leads and that there are no suspects. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. The investigation into that dime bag of cocaine that was found at the White House earlier this month is over. But there's no conclusion on who is responsible. The Secret Service announced this morning that no forensic or video evidence was able to clearly identify anyone potentially responsible for bringing this dime-sized baggie of the drug into the White House. The Secret Service did brief members of the House today. 3 sources familiar with that briefing tell NBC News that they had narrowed down the list of individuals who were in the area in question 48 hours before the cocaine was found to between 500 and 600 people. Our senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell has been all over the story. She joins me now. And Kelly, there was something notable in the reports of this. Did they interview anybody?
Not that we know of. And basically what we've been told is they looked at the surveillance video, they went through the visitor logs, and I suspect they would have done interviews if they had had some sort of forensic evidence that they could try to match to someone. But no one has talked about interviews in the time that I've been working on this over the last 10 days. So the surprising thing is people would expect, of course they can solve it. The FBI Crime Lab was involved. Fort Detrick, which does very sophisticated testing of things that could be anthrax or ricin or a biological agent. In this case, what they're saying is it was a very small plastic baggie. They could not get fingerprints that were usable off of that. They did some advanced testing, expensive process, and DNA. Didn't have enough material to do a comparison. If they had found something, then you would need to figure out, well, how do you compare it? And if you're talking about visitors, people who are coming in on a tour, a staff-led tour, not a public tour.
I was just going to say, we should remind people, this is why I'm a little skeptical of whether they could find it or not, because this is not the most trafficked entrance. And this is a VIP entrance, West Exec, in some form or another. Is it
VIPs
not?
go through there, but there are a lot. I call it a working entrance, meaning not a ceremonial
entrance. But you and I
entrance.
don't get to go through there. I mean, I've only been through there if I've been escorted.
Yes.
Because it's not a press entrance.
It is not a press entrance, but those who are, right now there is a lot of construction being done, some remodeling being done, so there are contractors, military personnel, staff will go through there, the president will go through there, going over to the EEOB. But in terms of visitors, it was a holiday weekend, and there are a lot of staff-led tours that happen after work hours and on the weekend. And so some officials are saying the leading theory, it was a visitor, but we don't know.
That's the Occam's razor.
Yes,
like the most likely thing is somebody that wasn't thinking, and if you're not knowing you're going to the White House, oh no, what did I have in my
And there's
pocket?
a drug policy and drug testing requirements for employees of the White House.
They still do drug testing.
Yes, they do.
And it's randomized drug testing.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
And so one of the congresswomen, Marjorie Taylor Greene, was saying, well, test all 500 of the names on the list. Well, of course, you need probable cause to do that. Right. You can't just massively test people who might have been visitors. So it's an unsatisfying answer for a lot of people.
What do you sense Congress, we know there's a few members of Congress are going to try to use this as a hobby horse. What do you sense, what could they do here in forcing more focus on this?
I think one of the questions was, if this can get through, is there a vulnerability in some other way? And people I've been talking to say when it comes to agents that might have been a powdery substance that could be used in a weapon form, that they have mechanisms to test for that they don't test for contraband. They don't test for illegal drugs that don't pose a threat to the president or others inside the White House. It certainly is not a good look, and no one feels good about that. And
I was just going to say, I'm guessing the White House doesn't like that there's no answer here.
Oh, it's unsatisfying
because
for
it
everyone.
only feeds the beast, the conspiratorial beasts that we know of, like trying to destroy our
and to answer that, family members typically don't use this entrance. Not that they couldn't, but they typically don't, and they're not asked to put their stuff in cubbies.
And this is,
Yes.
Kelly O'Donnell.
Nice to see you.
The strange stories of Washington. Thank you. After the break, trouble on the trail. Ron DeSantis faces sluggish support in the polls, new cash concerns, crowded field of GOP contenders, all struggling to catch up to the frontrunner. Panel is next. You're watching Meet the President. Welcome back. We've got fresh new evidence today of trouble in Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' campaign as it deals with lagging polls and flagging donors. NBC News has exclusively obtained a confidential memo, a campaign memo, seeking to reassure donors that his campaign is not stalled. It only, quote, looks stalled, they argue. The July 6th document lays out the campaign's path forward and argues that DeSantis has a plan to pry away Trump voters. It comes amid headlines suggesting donor doubts about DeSantis' bid. It's a concern that's been building since even before he officially entered the race. We reported back in March that both donors and allies felt he wasn't ready for a fight with Donald Trump. They were getting antsy. Hurry up and get in, they said. And then DeSantis continues to trail the former president by more than 24 points in the first qualifying poll for the August debate. DeSantis has employed a commonly used strategy to deflect from the headlines by, of course, blaming the media.
Well, I think if you look at the people like the corporate media, who are they going after? Who do they not want to be the nominee? They're going after me. We've got a long way to go. I'm looking forward to being able to participate in the debates, but this is not something that, I ever expected to just snap fingers and all of a sudden, you win 7 months before anyone happens. They've tried to create narratives that somehow the race is over. This is going to be a state-by-state contest.
Well, they're trying to create a narrative because they do not want me to be the nominee. They don't want me to be the nominee because they know I beat Biden handily.
As you saw, 3 of those appearances were on a network whose parent company is called News Corporation, corporate media there. DeSantis is also trying to put some heat on his Republican opponent. In an interview with conservative radio yesterday, DeSantis said Trump was not, quote, entitled to the nomination, criticizing Trump for suggesting he might skip the August primary debate. So let's have at it. We got a great panel to have this discussion. Betsy Woodruff-Swan, national correspondent at Politico and NBC News contributor. Also with me, former Democratic Congresswoman from Maryland, Donna Edwards, former Florida Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo. Florida, get it? We know with Mr. DeSantis. Both, of course, are NBC News political analysts. Betsy, let me start with Ron DeSantis here. A week doesn't go. It's been since March. A week doesn't go by where there is not the hand-wringing story. There's not the blind quote from donor X, or there's not the story that and a donor gets named who says sources close to him are still shopping around. This has been 2 months of this. I guess they finally felt like they had to send a memo.
That's right. There's clearly lots of agita in the DeSantis camp. The most fun way to read this memo is as a secret message from the DeSantis campaign to the DeSantis super PAC with basically a wish list of things that people on the campaign certainly seem to want the super PAC to be doing. For instance, it talks about themes for every month in terms of DeSantis's messaging. It says DeSantis might benefit from ads highlighting that he's a dad and a veteran. This seems to be a helpful strategy for us. And then buried in this memo, contra what DeSantis is saying publicly, the memo's anonymous author lays out the extreme importance that the DeSantis camp is putting on what's called earned media, meaning coverage in mainstream media rather than purchased campaign ads. And this memo says earned media is king.
How do you blame the corporate media for your troubles and then say you need all this earned media?
And then say you need as much of it as possible. And it specifically says DeSantis' supporters and surrogates need to do as much media as humanly possible. At the same time, though, DeSantis himself has been totally gun-shy when it comes to talking to mainstream media outlets. He's going on just about every Republican or conservative podcast you can find, flooding the zone when it comes to that media. But mainstream, and you follow this a little more closely than I do, Chuck, he's not doing it. He's staying away from it, which is very much in contrast to what he's asking his supporters to do in this document.
I think Gabe Gutierrez has gotten like one pull aside, and they he had to fight for that. Like it was a orchestrated, as far as DeSantis thought they were being, hey, look, we'll give you this, Carlos, what's the buzz in South Florida in particular, where there's a lot of people, Ken Griffin, and some other big donors down there who went down there thinking they were going to DeSantis land?
Well, and one of the reasons some of those donors are so disappointed is because they wanted someone who was different than Donald Trump. And everything Ron DeSantis has done maybe for 6 months is either copy Donald Trump or try to out-Trump Trump on issues like immigration and like abortion. When was Ron DeSantis at his best? His first year as governor. He actually focused on the environment. He had a libertarian streak to him. A lot of people took an interest in him. During the pandemic, he charted his own course. He was rewarded for that in the 2022 re-election. Got a lot of support, not just universal support from Republicans, but independents, Democrats. After that, he started trying to outdo Donald Trump. And another Floridian named Marco Rubio can tell you that it's impossible to out-Trump Donald Trump. So that's why this strategy is failing.
Donna, as a Democrat who wants to see Joe Biden reelected, is this development that DeSantis is struggling, do you view that as good news for Biden or bad news because maybe Tim Scott becomes the alternative, and Tim Scott, as the Republican nominee, would be a real threat to Joe Biden?
Well, I do think that Republican donors taking a closer look at Tim Scott is a sign that Ron DeSantis is just losing his steam really quickly. It's unclear to me whether that would make a stronger fight for Joe Biden at all, because in order to get the nomination, ultimately, somebody like Tim Scott is going to have to go farther right than he has been, and I think that that goes against his brand. I think where DeSantis really kind of loses out in all of this is that it's not just taking a second look. It's saying, we just don't think you can cut it on your extreme issues to the right. So
it is interesting to me, Betsy. It does feel as if there are some that want to do the Control-Alt-Delete here and say, let's restart this campaign. Let's have a real announcement. That Twitter thing was a disaster and all this stuff. And then there are some that don't want to show too much weakness. Like, where is that tension coming from? Is that Casey DeSantis? Is that Jeff Rowe? What do we sense here?
It's what DeSantis has going for him, of course, is that he has just a ludicrous amount of money, both his campaign and the super PAC backing him. So he's going to be able to stay in.
Another former Florida governor who ran for president in 2015 had an obscene amount of money, more than this guy right now, by the way.
Yeah. Maybe he can mail out DVD players or something to every single person in New Hampshire the way Jeb supporters did. The fact that they have tons of money gives them a certain level of cushion and comfort, but at the same time, the fact that their expenditures are not correlating to the kind of poll numbers they want to see, no doubt creates a massive amount of friction for DeSantis. What this memo highlights is that they think Trump has basically 25% of the Republican electorate baked in. So they need to wrap up. If they wrap up, the significant bulk of the rest of it, then they're going to be fine, mathematically speaking. What they also point out, of course, is that they view Tim Scott as a real problem, a rising threat, and, however, that they don't think anybody else really matters. That's just not borne out by the polls.
Yeah. Carlos, do you get a sense that they regret not announcing in January?
Yeah, and look, to be fair, I thought the timing of the announcement was perfect, and Florida candidates tend to announce in May after legislative session. It just makes sense. In hindsight,
now Donald Trump got in November before.
And when Ron DeSantis was on top of the world after his re-election, he was the big bright star for Republicans in November of 2022.
Republican members of Congress that would have come out and endorsed him on day in the first. He's got 6 total endorsements.
Yep. In hindsight, that would have been the right decision. I can't say that I would have recommended it at the time. I'd love to say I would have.
Good for you for admitting that, by the way, Carlos. Thank you. Not all pundits will do that.
He would have captured so much momentum. He would have gotten some of those Florida delegation members to endorse him, many of whom have endorsed Donald Trump now. So
yeah, but he ended up having to go through a legislative session where he had to dig even deeper on the right, which is something that he would not have had to do in January.
Which I don't understand. He didn't need to do that.
He didn't need it.
That is the part of this that is the head scratcher. He had already proved his conservative bona fides. Did he not?
Well, he did, but he thought that he was going to try to capture some of that Trump base, and what he should have been doing is making it so that everybody else was eliminated out of the field and there was a one-on-one contest.
That's it. The other problem with this strategy is they still seem to have an Iowa, and Iowa's first, But not a single Iowa winner on the Republican side has gotten the nomination in the 21st century. Not one, okay?
Statistically speaking, you should try to lose Iowa.
Yes. No, you have a better chance. I mean, you could keep going back, right? Losing Iowa on the Republican side has been a ticket to winning.
It's pretty funny.
I think Ronald Reagan in 80, right?
Funny.
George H.W. Bush in 88. I mean,
there's a real question of why bother. There's a real question of what does this mean. Now, DeSantis also says he's not ceding New Hampshire.
What it really means is look what it takes to win Iowa.
Right.
On the Republican side. You have to go further to the right. This is not a Republican primary electorate.
Right.
This is a caucus-going electorate. That means it is the most fervent people among the most fervent people.
Yes.
Anyway.
Something that I think a lot of casual observers of politics don't understand is just how bizarre the caucus process is. The fact that it can take hours to participate in a caucus.
Republican side does streamline.
It's challenging.
It is
still
faster
demanding.
on the Republican
It's
side.
demanding, though.
Yeah.
It's way more challenging than voting regularly. And that gives this hugely disproportionate influence to people who are on the ground in Iowa, to people who can find those folks who want to stand around in a high school gym on one evening instead of putting their kids to bed or spending time with their neighbors or whatever. And success in that contest just doesn't correlate at all to success in the Republican primary broadly.
So let's talk about Plan B on the Republican side, Carlos. What's your Plan B? Who'd you like to see?
Well, thankfully, I don't have to have plans these days. But look, I think someone like Tim Scott is the next person.
Or is it Glenn Youngkin? Because you hear some donors out there, and we know, look, Youngkin has a very, he is intentionally waiting until to see, for number one, I think he's waiting to see if DeSantis flails. And number two, does he have something he can run on? If he wins in the Virginia midterms this November, then he could say, hey, look what I'm doing in a blue state.
So if DeSantis continues to fail to fill this other than Trump lane, I think Tim Scott stands to benefit. And it certainly opens the door for perhaps a September announcement for someone fresh, different, who can distinguish themselves from Donald Trump without being locked into this anti-Trump, pro-Trump, paradigm.
Honestly, as much as we all like, hey, you're not doing this right, nobody's figured out how to beat Donald Trump on the Republican side.
Well, and it's still
fairness.
early because Donald Trump got in early, so there's plenty of time for a Glenn Youngkin.
Yeah, it's getting late early, or is it getting early late? I don't know. What would Yogi Berra say? Anyway, Betsy, Donna, and Carlos, thank you all. Still to come, for the first time ever, the FDA has approved a birth control pill that American women will be able to buy from the aisles of their local pharmacy without talking to a pharmacist. The details next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. And a potential game changer for women's health care and contraceptive access, the FDA approved the first over-the-counter birth control pill this morning. When the pill, called O-Pill, hits drugstore shelves, women will be able to access hormonal contraception without needing to visit a doctor for a prescription. The FDA approval comes amid renewed legal fights over women's reproductive rights, specifically the agency's authority to approve the common medication abortion pill mifepristone. NBC News correspondent Ann Thompson has more on this news of the over-the-counter pill. And Ann, I got to ask first, one pill does not fit all women here. So this is one pill. How soon before, because different pills work better for women depending, when will we start to see a variety of this on the shelves?
That's what advocates hope that we will see eventually. This is just the first contraceptive that we will see on an over-the-counter basis, Chuck. But the key here, really, the issue driving this is all about access. And the belief is that this pill, called O-Pill, which is a mini pill, it's just one hormone, progestin, it is approved for women of all reproductive ages. That includes teenagers. And the hope is that this will help reduce the number of unintended pregnancies in this country. There are 6.1 million pregnancies every year in this country. About half of them are unintended. And the belief is now that you will be able to go to the drugstore or the grocery store or order these pills online. That will help reduce that number. That should happen at the beginning of next year. But the big question tonight is how much will these pills cost? And the manufacturer has not put a price on it, only to say that they will be affordable. Chuck?
What took so long? I mean, we got the pill in the 50s, right? Why
in
did
the
this?
60s.
What took so long?
Well, we got the pill in the 60s. This formula was actually approved for prescription in 1973. So it's been out there for a long time. But I think it's like anything else. It's just taken us a while. And now that you have all these doctors saying, look, we need to have contraception be more widely available and effective contraception. And that's the difference here between other forms of contraception. This is 93% effective, up to 98% effective. That's if you use it correctly, and that's taking the pill every day, the same time every day. So it's here. It's taken a long time, much longer than a lot of people thought it ever should.
Still, an important milestone that we needed to hit. Ann Thompson reporting on this story for us. Ann, thank you. And thank you all for being with us this hour. I'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.